Welcome to Course 2, Unit 4, Lesson 1, What is a Preferred Share? In this lesson, we're going to learn about what a preferred share is, and then we're going to learn what are the things to consider when purchasing a preferred share. So let's get started. Okay, so for a lot of people, they don't really know what a preferred share is. They've heard of it, but they really don't understand how it works. So that's what we're going to cover in this unit. And in this lesson specifically, we're just going to go through the fundamentals of a preferred share. So when you look at this chart, you can see that the lowest risk that you're going to have on any investment is a bond when you're dealing with stocks or bonds. The preferred share is actually right in the middle on the risk, and then the common share, which we've talked about up to this point in the previous units and lessons, has all been common shares. So a preferred share is actually kind of in the middle as far as actually owning some of the equity of the business, but the preferred share performs like a bond. So as we go in the next slide, you're going to kind of see how that works. But as far as the thing that you got to really understand as far as risk is that the preferred share isn't as risky as owning common shares, but it is definitely more risky than just owning the bond of a company. One of the unique things about a preferred share is a lot of people would think that it would operate and have a lot of the same fundamentals as a common share, but it actually operates a lot more like a bond. So whenever you buy a preferred share, it's instead of having a coupon, it's going to have a dividend. A preferred share is a proportional piece of equity in a business. Now, what will confuse a lot of people is your piece of that business, your equity of that business, is only going to come about if the company would liquidate. So that proportional ownership that you own of that business really isn't doing anything for you as far as like the market price of that preferred share changing. Unless that company would liquidate, that's whenever whatever's left, if not all the money would go to the bondholders, whatever money would be left would then be paid to the preferred shareholders. And then any money that would be left over after both the bondholder and the preferred shareholder would be paid would then go to the common shareholders. And so that situation, in my personal opinion, is very unlikely. If you go through a liquidation of bankruptcy for a business, pretty much the bondholders are the only ones that are going to be able to get anything that remains in the business. So that share of equity that you're actually getting with the preferred share, in my opinion, really isn't worth anything because 9 times out of 10, if a company would go bankrupt and liquidate, all that money is going to be going to the bondholders, and the preferred shareholders and the common shareholders are pretty much going to lose everything at that point. So how does a preferred share work? As you can see here on the left-hand side, I have a bond, okay, and we're just going to call this Company X. So one bond of Company X. We're going to say that the term on the bond is 30 years. And if this terminology isn't making sense for you, I strongly encourage you to go back to Course 1, Unit 2 in order to take the 3 lessons about bonds. And all of this will be crystal clear after you take those lessons. So go back and take a look at those if these terms aren't making sense for you. But let's say on the left-hand side we have a bond. The term is 30 years. The face value is $1,000, and the coupon is $50. So our yield, we know based off of those figures, would give us a 5% yield on that bond. So just like that, we have one preferred share of Company X, okay? And let's just say that the term on that preferred share is 30 years. The face value, instead of it being $1,000, is only $25, and it pays an annual dividend of $1.50 a year. And so when you would take that dividend and divide it by the face value, you'd get actually a 6% yield. So this preferred share is very much like the bond in that it has a term, it has a face value. Instead of a coupon, it's now a dividend. The nice thing about the preferred share is it's a cheaper price than the $1,000 for the face value on the bond. But it's operating exactly through the same fundamentals. Now, a lot of preferred shares don't have a term. Now, a lot of preferred shares don't have a term of 30 years or 10 years. They're perpetual in term. So this scenario is kind of a unique one. You're not going to see that real common. It's much more common to see a perpetual preferred share, meaning that they'll issue it and it's out there until they decide to terminate the preferred share by buying it back. So, but you can find preferred shares with term limits on them. So how does it work? So the first thing that you have to understand whenever you're buying a preferred share is that you have to read the certificate of designation. And that certificate of designation describes all the intricacies of how that preferred share works and operates. So like I said before, this one that we used for company X has a term of actually 30 years, and then the company is going to go ahead and buy that preferred share back from the holder. But that's not always the case. So as you look at one company's preferred share to the next, it could be completely different the way that it operates. And all of that information is found in this certificate of designation. So if you're interested in purchasing preferred shares, this is something that you're definitely going to have to become familiar with and understand before you just kind of dive into something like this. And you got to understand that preferred shares are not a real big market. You've got a lot more bonds on the market and a lot more common shares on the market than you'll ever find in the preferred share market. So to understand how a preferred share works, you really got to understand why a company would want to issue a preferred share. Okay, so if just kind of picture yourself as being the CEO of a large business, and a lot of the times you'll see preferred shares issued on newly IPO type companies that are just going public that really need to raise some money. And so the beauty of a preferred share from the CEO's perspective and from the shareholders' perspective that currently own the company is that they can raise a lot of money by issuing these preferred shares, okay? And they have the flexibility to set up that certificate of designation. They can actually have the verbiage in there so that they can delay their dividend payments, even though that they say they're going to make a fixed dividend payment of, let's say, 6%. They can actually delay that and let those dividend payments accumulate and then pay them later. Some certificates of designation will actually have verbiage in there that that the company doesn't even have to repay the dividend. It's just really kind of goodwill to the person who purchases it. So that's why you really need to read that certificate in order to understand how that verbiage is. But if you were the company issuing these preferred shares, that's a great thing because now you have the flexibility to not even make that dividend payment to the person who's holding it. So that gives the company a lot of flexibility. Also, this is the real reason, and it's because the company can retain its equity of the business for those common shareholders. So think of it this way. If you're a common shareholder of a business and you want to raise some money, but you don't want to give up that equity that you currently possess of the business, issue some preferred shares, because although that person thinks they've got some equity of the business, the only time that equity is going to be materialized is if the company would liquidate or fail. So let's say you issued a 6% preferred share out of your company to raise some money, and interest rates go down to like 4% and they're much lower. Well, you'll obviously want to pay off that holder of that preferred share, which you'd have that set up in your indenture so that you can do that. So you'd pay off that preferred share, issue new ones at the lower interest rate so you're not paying such a high interest rate to the holder. And so you have that flexibility to immediately pay off that preferred share, and all that equity immediately disappears whenever you buy that preferred share back. So really, the equity that you're seeing, you're not seeing any growth in a market price or anything like that, because the market price is going to be completely dependent on the interest rate alone, just like a bond, just like you saw with a bond. So what's some of the things that you might see in this certificate of designation? So the first thing that I want to bring up is the cumulative preferred versus a non-cumulative preferred. So a cumulative preferred, you'll eventually get your dividend, but you might not have the ability to compound a consistent dividend payment. But at least you're getting that payment. So in this scenario here, where the dividend's $1.50 for company X, if the company can't make the payment and they skip that payment, that dividend payment, they eventually have to make that payment. They have to pay you the $1.50. So maybe your next dividend is $3 opposed to just $1.50 because they have to make that up. Now, whenever you see terminology in this certificate of designation for a non-cumulative preferred, that company does not have to pay you the dividend. They're most likely going to pay you the dividend, but they don't have to. And that's something that you got to really beware of. I would never, ever buy a preferred share with a non-cumulative preferred dividend payment. Okay, so I briefly talked about the term and how many preferred shares are perpetual preferred shares, and it has no maturity date to it. So that company can issue that preferred share and it can stay out there for as long as they want, and they can just keep making those payments to you. So if you buy a preferred share and it has a very low interest rate, you might be holding on to that for a really long time. And unfortunately for that person who would buy a low interest yielding preferred share, because it has no term to it, it's not going to then rise back up to that face value of $25 for this generic share we have here. It might just sit down there at $15. So you might buy that preferred share for $25, and if interest rates start rising from where you bought it, it might sit down there at a market price of $15 forever. As you continue to hold it, because there's no exit strategy for this type of person that bought a preferred share without a term. So there's two learning points there. Either make sure you buy one that has a term, or make sure you don't buy a preferred share with a really low interest rate, and you'll avoid that scenario. Okay, so the next thing that you got to be aware of is the callability of the preferred share. You're pretty much always going to find preferred shares with a callability clause in the certificate of designation. So that's just something that you're going to have to work with. If you buy a preferred share with a really high yield, let's say you're buying something at 10% or 8%, and it's a fairly decent company, they don't have enormous amounts of debt, you can pretty much expect that to get called. So when you buy that, you just kind of go into that with the anticipation that you're going to be called on that, and they're going to pay you back your initial purchase price or the face value of the preferred share in order to stop paying that high interest rate. So that's just something you got to be ready for. Most preferred shares have an adjustable dividend rate. Now, I told you that it was a fixed dividend rate at the beginning of the lesson, but depending on how that certificate of designation is set up, you might actually purchase a preferred share that has an adjustable dividend rate. This is something that you want to avoid unless you're buying a low interest rate, because then it'll probably go up for you. But the name of the game, and as you guys have learned up to this point, is when you're buying a fixed income security or a preferred share, you're trying to find something paying a high dividend. You're trying to get something that whenever those yield curves are pretty flat and above your 4 and 5% mark for your 10-year federal note, you're wanting to find something that has a high yield and that is fixed, because that's what gives you the leverage for whenever the interest rates drop to sell that at a nice premium, so then you can use that to go and buy your common shares. So just something to think about, something that you're going to definitely want to look for if you're going and buying preferred shares, that you want to try to avoid something that has an adjustable dividend rate. So just to kind of quickly recap here what we're looking for when we're purchasing a preferred share. One, you absolutely have to read that certificate of designation and understand all those basic fundamentals that I just discussed. You definitely want to buy a cumulative preferred share, because that's going to guarantee that you're going to go ahead and get that dividend payment. You want to avoid, if possible, perpetual terms, because that's going to allow you to have an exit strategy. That's going to allow you to have the market price eventually go back to the face value of what the preferred share was issued at. And you're just going to have to beware of callable securities. So that concludes Course 2, Unit 4, Lesson 1, what is a preferred share? So in this lesson, we learned what a preferred share was, and we learned what are the things to consider when purchasing a preferred share. So I hope this lesson was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson.